"Please, just make it quick," she said. But the rancher whispered, "Not today. Not you, Bait." It was late in the afternoon when she arrived. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the distant hills, casting an orange glow over the open plains.
She looked like she had walked miles, her clothes torn and her face pale. Dust clung to her skin, and her eyes were empty, as if the weight of the world had crushed her spirit.
Brash. She was a woman who had lost everything, and now she was lost herself. She had heard of the rancher before. There were whispers about him in town, stories of a man who had lived through hardship and loss yet still carried on. Some said he had a heart of stone, that he was a man who preferred solitude over company. Others claimed he had saved more people than anyone could count. But none of those stories helped her now. She wasn't looking for hope or promises. She wasn't looking for anyone to tell her things would get better. She was simply looking for an end, a way to make it all stop. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she walked toward the ranch house. She could hear the sound of horses in the distance, and the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. The house was large, with wooden walls weathered by time. But there was something comforting about it. Bonnie, the rancher's place. She had never been here before, but something about it felt like the last stop on a long journey. When she reached the front door, she hesitated for a moment. Her hand shook as she reached for the door, but she forced herself to knock. A door creaked open, revealing a man standing in the doorway. He was tall, his face weathered by years of sun and hard work. His eyes, however, were sharp, calm, but filled with the wisdom that only comes from a life fully lived.
He studied her for a moment.
She didn't speak at first. She couldn't. The words were stuck somewhere deep inside, but the pain, the emptiness, it was all too much. She had come to him for one reason, to make it stop. Round. She had heard that the rancher could put an end to things when people didn't have the strength to go on. She had lost the will to fight, to keep going, and in her mind she thought it was the only way to find peace, rest. "I can't take it anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible as if the words themselves were too heavy to say out loud. "Please, just make it quick." There was no pity in the rancher's eyes, no judgment. He looked at her like a person, not as someone to be fixed or saved. His gaze was steady, unflinching, but there was something else there, a quiet understanding. It was as though he could see past the pain she was hiding, past the despair that was consuming her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound between them was the rustling of the wind and the distant calls of the horses. The rancher stepped forward, his boots making soft thuds on the porch. Breaths. She expected him to say something, anything, that might make her feel heard, but instead he just looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to understand the depth of her pain. Brit. Then, quietly, almost as if to himself, he spoke. "Not today," he said. "Not you." Her heart skipped a beat, the words cutting through her like a cold wind. She hadn't expected him to refuse. She had thought that maybe, just maybe, he would offer her the mercy she sought. But his words were not filled with rejection. There was no anger, no force. It was more like a soft command, a whisper of something more than she had bargained for. "Not today," he repeated, his voice steady and calm. "Not you." The rancher had not agreed to her request, but he hadn't dismissed it either. He had given her a simple answer, and yet it felt like something more. It was as though he was offering her a choice, a chance, maybe the only one she had left. She took a step back, uncertain of what to do next. The weight of her sorrow was still heavy, like an anchor tied around her chest, but there was something about his presence that kept her rooted to the spot. She looked at him, not knowing what she expected, but hoping for some kind of answer that would tell her what to do. But he didn't offer answers. Instead, he waited. The silence between them stretched on, stretching longer than she had anticipated. She felt herself shifting, unsure, uncomfortable in the stillness. Breaths. Finally, she spoke again, her voice shaky but clear. I just want it to end.
I can't keep going. It's too much.
The rancher nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. I understand, he said quietly, his voice low and steady. I've been there. But ending it, that's not the way out. Brave. Not for you. She looked away, her eyes landing on the ground.
The dust beneath her boots was a reminder of the world she had been trying to escape, a world that had become too much to bear.
Desk. She wasn't sure if she was ready to believe him, but his words were not like the others she had heard. They weren't full of promises or false hope. They were simply honest, grounded in something real, something she hadn't been able to see until now. The rancher stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. Come inside, he said. You're welcome here. No one will judge you. But you don't have to make this decision today.
She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do.
But something about his offer felt different, and in that moment she decided to step inside. She didn't know what the future held, but the rancher's words had given her a flicker of something, a sliver of hope she hadn't had in a long time.
It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her stay. As she entered the house, the door closed behind her.
The warmth inside was comforting, but it wasn't the kind of warmth that made you feel safe. It was the kind of warmth that made you feel seen, like someone understood the quiet struggle that went on inside your heart. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel so alone. The rancher closed the door softly behind them, locking out the wind and the dust that had followed the woman into his home. The room smelled of earth and hay, with the faint scent of leather from old saddles resting against the walls. It was simple, yet it felt safe in its simplicity. A place where the harshness of the world seemed to fade, even if just for a little while.
He motioned for her to sit by the fire where the flames crackled softly, casting warm light over the room.
She stood near the door for a moment, unsure of what to do, still caught in the weight of her thoughts. The rancher did not rush her, nor did he press her to speak. Desperate, he simply let the silence hang between them. Comfortable in its quietness, it was in this silence that she began to feel the tension in her shoulders ease, the tightness in her chest lessening with every slow breath. The soft glow from the fire felt gentle against her skin, like it was trying to undo the years of hardship that had scarred her heart. She finally took a seat by the fire, her eyes on the flickering flames. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about the darkness in her life. She wasn't thinking about the pain or the guilt that had plagued her every waking moment. For the first time in a long time, she felt a little lighter. The rancher sat down across from her, not too close, but within reach if she needed him. He was still as calm as before, his eyes steady and focused. Breath. He didn't speak at first, and for a moment she wondered if he had forgotten her request. But then, in the stillness, he finally broke the silence. I know what it feels like, he said, his voice soft but full of strength. To think you can't go on, to feel like there's nothing left. I've been there. He looked into the fire,
his gaze distant, as if he were recalling something deep in his past. It wasn't that long ago, really.
Life has a way of breaking you down. And when you've been broken enough times, it gets harder to see any way out. As if his words were speaking directly to the broken parts of her heart. She had never expected him to understand. She had come here expecting to be turned away, or at best, ignored. But this man, this rancher, wasn't offering her pity. He was offering her a part of himself, something she wasn't sure she could accept. Sometimes, he continued, you have to dig deep and find something inside you that's still strong. Something that hasn't been destroyed by all the hurt.
It might not seem like much, but it's enough to keep going, even when it's hard.
Especially when it's hard. The woman felt his words sink in, like seeds being planted in the dark soil of her mind. She had never thought about it that way before. She had always seen her pain as something that would swallow her whole. But what if there was a way to survive it? What if, instead of letting it destroy her, she could find a way to live with it? Bow. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of doubt and curiosity. How do you do it? She asked quietly. Brad, how do you keep going when everything feels like it's falling apart? The rancher leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on his knees. His voice was steady, filled with a quiet confidence that she hadn't expected. One day at a time, he said. You don't have to have all the answers. Breath. You don't have to know everything. But if you take it one step at a time, one day at a time, it gets a little easier. He paused, letting his words hang in the air, before adding, it's not about making it perfect. It's about surviving.
And sometimes surviving is enough. The woman swallowed, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest.
Could it really be that simple? Could she survive this? Was it possible to just keep going, even when every part of her wanted to give up? The rancher stood up and moved toward the window, his silhouette outlined against the fading light outside. He looked out over the land, the vast stretches of open space that seemed endless. When I lost my wife, he said, his voice low and steady, I thought I couldn't go on. I thought I would never be the same again.
And in some ways, I wasn't. But I had to find a reason to keep going.
I had to keep working. Keep living.
Because if I didn't, I wouldn't have made it through. The woman listened intently, her eyes never leaving him.
Beishi. She felt the pain in his voice, a pain that was still raw, still there even after all these years. She had never known a love like that, but she could understand the emptiness that came with losing someone you cared for. But you did make it through, she said softly. He turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers.
Yeah, I did, he said with a small smile. And so can you. She sat there for a moment, absorbing his words. It wasn't a promise of a perfect life. It wasn't a guarantee that everything would get better.
But it was something else. It was hope, in its simplest form. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way forward, even when it felt like there wasn't. The rancher looked at her with quiet understanding, as though he knew exactly what she was thinking.
You don't have to do it all at once, he said. You just have to take that first step, and then the next.
It doesn't matter how small. It just matters that you keep moving forward. The woman nodded slowly, her mind racing with the possibilities. Breath. Could she really do this? Could she really find a way to keep going, to survive the storm that had been raging inside her for so long? I'll help you, the rancher said, his voice steady and reassuring. You don't have to do it alone. Breaths. We'll take it one day at a time. And in that moment she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth fighting for, but a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, piece by piece. The fire crackled softly in the background, its warmth now a symbol of something more than just a fire. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was still light. Perhaps, in the quiet strength of the rancher, she had found the courage to find her own. The next few days were slow, each one feeling like a small step forward. The rancher didn't rush her, and he didn't try to force her into anything she wasn't ready for. He let her move at her own pace, while still guiding her with a steady hand. Every task he gave her was simple, yet purposeful, a way for her to reconnect with something outside of her own pain, something that could remind her that life, no matter how difficult, still had moments worth living for. It started with small things. In the morning, she helped him feed the horses. It wasn't glamorous work, just filling the troughs with hay and water, but it felt real. There was something grounding about it, something that made her feel connected to the earth beneath her feet. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was floating, disconnected from the world around her. As they worked together, the rancher didn't speak much. He simply moved with purpose, teaching her how to handle the animals and care for them. The horses, large and strong, seemed to trust him immediately, and he handled them with a quiet, respectful manner. She watched him with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. How could someone be so at ease in a world that had caused her so much pain? By the third day, he had her working on mending a fence at the far end of the property. The fence had been damaged in a storm a few months ago, and it had been left unattended. Now it was time to fix it. She stood at one end, holding the tools as he worked on the other side, giving her instructions along the way. "Just make sure the nails are straight," he said as he hammered one into place.
If they're crooked, the whole fence will weaken. It's all about the details. She nodded, not quite understanding at first, but as she worked, it became clear.
The task wasn't just about fixing the fence. It was about learning how to focus, how to pay attention to the small things that made a big difference. Each nail she hammered into the wood felt like one more thing she was taking control of. One more piece of her life that she was putting back together. It wasn't easy, though. The physical labor was hard, and there were moments when she wanted to give up, to drop the hammer and walk away. But the rancher's presence, steady and unwavering, kept her going. He didn't force her to finish the job, but he encouraged her, gently reminding her of the importance of seeing things through.
"You're doing fine," he would say, his voice low and reassuring.
Brands. And bit by bit she did. By the end of the day, the fence was standing tall again, the wooden slats lined up perfectly, the nails secure in their places. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The woman stepped back and looked at the work they had done. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of accomplishment. The weight in her chest wasn't as heavy as it had been. There was a small, quiet part of her that was starting to believe in herself again. That evening, as the sun set over the ranch, the woman and the rancher sat on the porch watching the colors of the sky change from orange to pink to purple. It was quiet, except for the soft sounds of the animals in the distance and the rustling of the leaves in the trees. The woman sat with her hands resting in her lap, feeling the coolness of the evening air on her skin. She didn't have to say anything. The silence between them was comfortable, a sign that the space between them was no longer filled with the heaviness that had consumed her. The rancher spoke first, his voice steady and calm.
"You're stronger than you think," he said, his eyes looking out at the horizon. "I can see it in the way you work."
You've got it in you, even if you don't believe it yet.
She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity.
But there was none. He was simply telling the truth as he saw it. And in that moment, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not in what she had done for the rancher, but in herself. She had taken a small step forward. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next morning, the rancher asked her to help him with something a little more difficult. They were going to move some heavy supplies to the barn. The bags of feed were large, and the barrels of water were even heavier. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't sure if she could lift them, and she didn't want to slow him down. But he didn't give her a choice. "You're going to help," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "You'll feel better once you do. It's not about how much you can lift, it's about trying." She nodded, accepting the challenge. They worked together, lifting the heavy bags and barrels, slowly moving them from one side of the ranch to the other. The woman struggled at first, her arms shaking with the effort. But as the morning passed, she began to find a rhythm. The work was hard, but it was satisfying. Every time she moved a barrel, every time she lifted a bag, it felt like she was lifting a weight off her shoulders, if only for a moment. By midday, they were finished. The supplies were where they needed to be, and the woman stood with her hands on her hips, her body sore but her heart lighter than it had been in days. She had done it. She had worked hard, and she hadn't given up. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe without the constant weight of despair pressing down on her. The rancher smiled at her, a rare warmth in his expression. "Brace. You did good," he said simply. "I knew you could." She smiled back, not out of politeness, but because she genuinely felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a grand change, and it didn't make everything suddenly better. But it was a change, and it was enough. She was still here, still alive, and she was still moving forward. That was more than she had believed was possible just a few days ago. As the sun began to set once again, they sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn dark. The woman leaned back in her chair, her body tired but content. She had a long way to go, but she could see now that there was hope for the future. It wasn't about forgetting the past or erasing the pain. Breath. It was about learning how to live with it, how to keep moving despite it. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she knew she had the strength to do it. The morning came with a chill in the air, and the sky was covered with dark clouds. The rancher had warned her the night before that a storm was approaching. She had no experience with storms like these, the kind that could whip through the open plains with terrifying speed. It was the rancher's world, one where weather could change in an instant, and danger was never far away. He had explained that these storms weren't something to be taken lightly, and the best way to survive them was to be prepared. By noon, the winds had picked up, and the first few raindrops began to fall. The woman felt her nerves tighten, but she didn't show it. Instead, she went about her tasks helping the rancher secure everything that needed to be tied down before the storm grew worse. They worked quickly, moving hay bales, covering the farm tools, and making sure the horses were safely tucked into the barn. The rancher was calm as always, but there was a sharpness in his movements that she hadn't seen before. She couldn't help but admire how focused he was, how he seemed to have done this countless times before. There was a steadiness in his actions that made her feel less afraid, like if she followed him. Even so, her stomach was tight with anticipation, knowing the worst of the storm was still ahead. As the wind howled and the rain began to pour, they finished their work, retreating to the safety of the house. The warmth from the fire inside felt like a relief from the cold, damp air outside. The rancher settled into his usual chair, and the woman took a seat across from him. She had learned to appreciate the silence between them, a quiet comfort that made her feel more at peace than she had in years. But that night, the storm wasn't just about the weather outside. Something inside her stirred, a sense of unease that she couldn't shake. She had become used to the stormy days, the work, and the way the rancher helped her through them.
But tonight, she felt different. The storm wasn't just outside.
It was inside her, too. The wind howled louder, and the rain started to pound against the windows. The woman could hear the sound of the horses shifting nervously in the barn. The rancher noticed her fidgeting and looked at her, his gaze as steady as always.
"Don't worry about them," he said, his voice calm. "They're fine."
They've been through worse.
She nodded, but the unease wouldn't leave her.
She felt like she was on the edge of something, like the storm outside was a sign of something deeper inside her, something that she couldn't hide any longer. It was the pain, the deep sadness that had been with her for so long, and for the first time it felt like it might break free. "I don't think I can do this," she said suddenly, her voice quieter than she intended. "I don't think I can keep going. I don't know how to keep going." The rancher didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood up and walked over to the window, his eyes watching the storm rage outside. Right. And he felt her heart race, wondering if he was angry or maybe disappointed. But he didn't seem either of those things. He was simply there, quiet and steady. "I know what it feels like to be lost," he said, his voice low but full of understanding. "I've been where you are. I've been at the point where it felt like there was nothing left." "But you're not there yet. You're still fighting." She looked at him, her eyes searching for something in his expression. "Biting what?" "I don't feel like I'm fighting anything anymore."
The rancher turned toward her, his eyes softening with a mixture of empathy and something else, something that looked almost like hope.
"You're fighting for your life," he said gently. "You're fighting for yourself."
"You're stronger than you think, and I'm not going to let you give up on yourself."
"But..."
His words hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't a plea for her to do something, but a simple statement, one that made her realize that maybe she hadn't given up.
Not yet. Maybe there was still a part of her that wanted to keep going, even if she couldn't see it clearly. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. The rancher walked over and sat next to her, didn't try to offer more words of comfort. Instead, he simply sat in silence, as though he understood that sometimes words weren't enough. They stayed like that for a while, the storm continuing to rage outside, but the silence between them felt different now. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't filled with pain or fear. It was a peaceful silence, one that didn't require anything to be said. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, something was beginning to change. It wasn't just the weather. It was her. The woman who had come here looking for an end, now finding herself in a place where she could take one more step forward. She had not yet given up. And as the night wore on, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't hope exactly, but it was something else, something that had been buried beneath the weight of all her sorrow. The next morning, the storm passed. The clouds broke apart to reveal a clear sky, the sun beginning to rise over the horizon. The air was fresh, clean, as if the storm had washed away everything that had been heavy and dark. The woman stepped outside, breathing in the crisp morning air. The steam of Beth sound somewhere else, as if the storm had not only passed through the sky but also through her heart. The rancher was already outside, tending to the horses. He looked up as she stepped out, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He didn't say anything right away. He didn't need to. There was a quiet understanding between them now, one that hadn't been there before. The woman walked over to the horses, her steps slower, more confident. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she felt like she could handle it. She wasn't ready to say everything was fine, but she was ready to try. That, in itself, was enough.
As the sun rose higher in the sky, the rancher gave her a nod, a silent acknowledgement of her strength.
You're going to be all right, he said softly. She didn't know if he was right, but in that moment, she didn't need to know.
All she needed to do was take one step at a time, and that was enough for now. The days that followed the storm felt different, though the work on the ranch never stopped.
The woman could feel it inside herself, a shift that wasn't immediate but gradual, like the turning of the seasons. She wasn't the same person who had walked into the rancher's home all those days ago. She wasn't fully healed, nor had all of her fears and doubts vanished, but something inside her had begun to change. The weight she carried didn't feel quite as heavy as it had before. The rancher had shown her the way, not by telling her how to fix her life, but by showing her how to move through it, one small task at a time. The everyday routines of ranch life, once so foreign to her, now felt grounding. Each morning she woke up before dawn to help feed the animals and prepare for the day. It was simple work, but it gave her a sense of purpose that she hadn't known in years. The horses had become a comfort to her, too. She learned their rhythms, their personalities. Some were stubborn and proud, while others were gentle and shy. She found that she could talk to them, even if they didn't respond. It wasn't about expecting an answer. It was about giving herself the freedom to express what she had been holding inside. The rancher had said she would heal in her own time, and he hadn't been wrong. One morning as she worked with the horses, the rancher approached her, his steady gaze taking in the way she moved, the confidence that had begun to appear in her every action. He nodded, a quiet approval in his eyes. "You're doing well," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something behind it. Something that hinted at pride. "I knew you had it in you." She looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she deserved his praise. It wasn't just about the work she had done. It was about the person she was becoming. Slowly, but surely, she was starting to believe in herself again.
That afternoon, as they worked on another fence together, she noticed something she hadn't before. The rancher was teaching her more than just the tasks at hand.
He was teaching her about patience, resilience, and the value of small, steady progress. It was a lesson that had taken her far too long to learn. That healing wasn't something that happened overnight, so it was a slow, steady process, like mending a fence, one nail at a time. "Sometimes it's not about how fast you go," he said, his voice as calm as ever.
"It's about making sure you don't give up, no matter how hard it gets."
The fence won't stay up if you rush through it. The same goes for life. Bah. She nodded, taking in his words. They made sense to her now. The idea of rushing to fix everything, to find a quick solution to her pain, had always been a part of her mindset. But now she understood. There were no shortcuts to healing. It was about the small steps, the small victories, the quiet moments of progress. It was about taking each day as it came and not expecting miracles. As the days turned into weeks, the woman felt her confidence growing. She no longer felt like a stranger in her own skin. She had a place here, a purpose. She wasn't just surviving, she was living. And it was a slow process, but it was happening. Every time she completed a task, whether it was fixing a fence or caring for the horses, she felt a little stronger. She felt the old weight in her chest lifting, replaced by something lighter, something more hopeful. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and purple, the woman and the rancher sat together on the porch. The air was cool, and the sounds of the animals in the distance were comforting. It was peaceful here, quieter than the world she had left behind. She leaned back in her chair, the tiredness from the day's work settling in her bones. But there was a satisfaction in it now, a satisfaction she hadn't known before. The rancher sat next to her, looking out over the land. The silence between them was no longer heavy or uncomfortable. It was easy, the kind of silence that comes with understanding. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "But when I came here, I thought I was beyond help. I thought I didn't have anything left to give." "But you—" She trailed off, unsure how to put the feelings into words. It was hard to explain just how much he had changed everything for her. Breaths. How he had helped her see that there was still something worth fighting for. The rancher turned to her, his eyes steady. "You did it," he said. "I just showed you how to find it in yourself." "You're the one who kept going." She smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in so long. She realized he was right. He had given her the tools, but she had chosen to use them. She had chosen to take that first step, no matter how difficult it had been. And now, she was here. She was alive, not just in body, but in spirit, too. The rancher's words echoed in her mind, one day at a time. It was a lesson that had taken root deep within her. She didn't need to have all the answers, and she didn't need to know exactly what the future held. Breath. All she needed to do was keep moving forward one step at a time, and so she did. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, the woman looked out over the land, feeling a quiet sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead wasn't clear, and she knew there would be challenges. But for the first time, she was ready. Breath. She had found the strength to keep going, and that was enough. The rancher stood up, stretching his arms above his head. "Tomorrow we'll work on the barn. We've still got a lot to do." She stood, too, a smile on her face. "Hey! I'll be ready!" she said. And she would be. Hey. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of the future. She knew she could face whatever came her way. Because she wasn't alone anymore. She had herself. Psst. And that was all she needed.